Okay, you are listening to the award-winning Philadelphia Hall Monitor here on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, on Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHMWPPM. Tonight on the program, we'll be joined by City Controller Christy Brady, making her Hall Monitor debut tonight with us to discuss her office's report on the city's community expansion grants. Our own Lance Haber will report live from City Council's first community budget meeting, and we'll discuss the city's 5-year budget plan. Denise, how are you tonight?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Now, Denise, I want to say something here, and I want you to react as if I did not text you immediately after I heard this fact today. Do you know how much it costs at a 4-way intersection to put up 4 traffic lights? What would you think that number is going to be, even though you already know it, if you had to guess?
Before you sent it to me, I'd have thought maybe $250,000, $300 on the outside, but it's actually over $700,000.
Yes, it is.
And what that tells us both is that we are in the wrong line of work.
We should have gone into, and that's what Allison, who's back, who does the production for us, said when I told her that. Yes, $750,000. So if you go to like 22nd and Market right now, and you stand on the corner and you look at those lights, $750,000 right there.
Wow. And the thing is, no one. I mean, if the idea is to calm traffic in that intersection, it's not necessarily having the desired effect. Because one of the scariest things I ever saw at that particular intersection was someone trying to walk their dog across Market Street in rush hour traffic. They had to pick the dog up because the dog was terrified.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why would you even attempt to walk a dog in an intersection where you don't know if everybody is going to honor the stoplight?
No, you don't know that. Curb cuts for ADA compliance on, you go to the end of your block, you could see this. They cost, to get the 2 of them on the end of your block, about $36,000 to do that. Between 70 and 80% of the city's paving budget goes towards ADA compliance, which is very important. But you wouldn't think it's that much.
It's a lot. And it also explains why when you park in front of a curb cut and you get a ticket, why that ticket is so big.
And for traffic calming, they make the rubber strips that they put on the ground. Each one of those costs about $4,000 to install.
Now, that's without the strip itself. That's just to install the strip?
I think that's everything.
Oh, okay.
Some of these numbers I had known previously, but others, the $750,000 figure I learned today. And that was shocking to me.
It is a little shocking because you wouldn't think it cost that much. But other than, showing both of us that we got into the wrong line of work, it shows just how expensive anything that has to do with roads and bridges is, which is why right now you have the incident in Baltimore where the Key Bridge got knocked down. And even with the $60 million that the federal government has pledged to give the state of Maryland to start the process of fixing that bridge, that's not going to cover everything.
No, not even close. Because you're talking probably hundreds of millions, to really get that where it needs. Maybe billions. I don't know. But when you hear things like this, it gives you an idea. Well, I can't fathom the $6.3 billion number, right? That's what the operating budget is this year. I conceptually kind of understand what that means, but I really, it's just a word,
Mm-hmm.
And when you start adding up things like this, you start to realize where all that money goes, right? How much of that money is just already accounted for before you even sit down.
Right.
It's really surprising, and it's very, to me, it's very interesting, because now when you hear things like that, you start to realize, oh, there you go. If we're talking, I don't know, $30 million to fix some streetlights on 35 blocks this year, it's easy to see where it goes,
Mm-hmm.
But speaking of budgets, we're going to talk a lot about budget tonight. Tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about the 5-year plan. And what I want to do is bring on our own Lance Haber, who is Lance is out. I'm told he's having some connection difficulties, so we'll have Lance come back. But he's reporting live tonight from City Council's first budget hearing. Now, if we can bring up that visual of the budget hearings, the other one, if we have that, we'll show everybody when and where they're going to be. This has been in our newsletter, and we're going to keep publicizing these because people should go. So tonight's the first one at South Philadelphia High School. That's where Lance is going to be tonight. We are going to have the next one, April 15th, at Martin Luther King High, 6100 Stenton Avenue. That's on April 15th. On April 25th at the John F. Street Community Center at 1100 Poplar Street. And on April 29th, at the West Philadelphia High School, 49th and Chestnut Street, right around the corner from me, actually. So I'll definitely be at that one, if not more than one. So these are a great way for you to go and hear what's going on and make your voice heard and say, hey, we want money for this. Good opportunity to do that. A good opportunity to hear what's going on, especially, the budget hearings during the day. Not everybody can watch them. And not everyone's going to watch them after work and, record them. I don't know if a lot of people are doing that. But if you're interested and you can take a night to go check this out, it's really worth it. It's worth hearing what's going on. And I'm told we have Lance back. Let's see if we got him.
Should be with you now.
There we go, Lance.
Hey, Lance.
Good evening. I'm in the auditorium of South Philadelphia High. Many of the council members have made the trip down here to hear what the public wants to say. People are coming in, they're filtering in. I don't know if you can see behind me, but there's going to be a proposal put forward. Citizens who want to say this is what the priorities are for the city, this is what they should be. This is a tremendous opportunity. How often is it that you get 7 council people in the room listening to you? And those people who are concerned about how the budget is being spent and how our money is being used and what the city's priorities are, really should make an attempt to come to one of these meetings. As I think Larry spoke about earlier, there are 3 more. Tonight's the first night. But this is really our opportunity, the public's opportunity to participate in our own democracy. It's unique for city council. I'll just point out, Congress doesn't do this. The state legislature doesn't do this. It's only Philadelphia City Council, under the leadership of the council president. The past it was Council President Street, Verna, Clark, and now it's Council President Kenyatta Johnson, who say the council should represent the interests of the people. We're going to hold public hearings. We're going to invite people to come here and basically tell council this is what we think is important. So I'm going to let you go back to reporting on the operating budget and on the 5-year plan, and talk about what you think the important issues for the council are.
I just have one question, Lance. Are there a lot of people in attendance? Is it going to be a full house or close to it?
It will not be a full house. Many of us are so used to not being listened to that we don't come out anymore. There are a number of people here. I see a number of people with written testimony. They're prepared. I'd say they're between 50 and 100. But, South Philadelphia High is one of the old high schools. I'm not a really good judge, but I would guess this auditorium would hold 1,000 people. So 100 people is a good turnout for a public meeting. In a room that holds 1,000, it doesn't look that big. But what's impressive is people are coming with their notes, they're signing up, they're moving forward. And again, for me, as someone who's been doing this for all my adult life, it's always impressive when the elected officials show up. Normally, they send staff. Normally, they don't care enough to listen. But we see here council members who have made the effort to come and listen to what people have to say. Now, some of us are going to be very informed and have incisive testimony. But the truth is, some of us are going to have testimony that doesn't really relate to reality. And it's important for us to give everyone a voice and everyone a chance, and the council people honoring the public and saying whether you really understand what the sinking fund is and how the capital budget works and the 5-year plan works, or if you just have a kind of crazy idea. Like one year I was at one of these hearings, someone said, you know what we ought to do? We ought to open up the schools at night and turn them into casinos.
Okay.
That's the type of idea where you go, wait, is that a crazy idea or is that like a really smart idea? And then he went on to say they can sell pretzels. So then it became not a good idea, a crazy idea. But those are the type of innovative things people listen to. They turn them into their own ideas. And then hopefully, as the future unfolds, we'll move forward.
All right. Well, Lance, thank you so much for being there.
And I will make an attempt to capture what people say and report on it next week, and I can let people know what the sentiment of the public was.
That sounds great. Well, Lance, thank you so much for being there, and we'll look forward to. Oh, we lost him, but we'll definitely look forward to talking. Oh, there he is again. All right. So, Lance, thank you so much for being there. We're going to look forward to hearing about that next week.
Thank you. Enjoy.
Right. So, if we could bring up that PowerPoint now, we will talk about that 5-year plan. And, last week, Denise, we spoke with Marissa Waxman, and she talked about the importance of a 5-year plan. Now, the city of Philadelphia is required to have a 5-year plan. And it's better for the public to see this because she said that in other places, if you just do a year-by-year budget, you can kind of hide some things. And with a 5-year plan, you can't. And we're going to talk a little bit about that as we go through this. So let's see that first slide there. And we're going to tell you what the 5-year plan is. This is the city's budget and revenue projections 5 years into the future. It's important to remember that these are estimates and that they can change and will change. Mm-hmm. But this is a good snapshot of where we are right now. And the city was required to do this because of PICA, the Pennsylvania Intergovernmental Cooperation Authority agreement. That, just a quick synopsis of what that is. Back in the early 90s, the city was facing default, and it borrowed money. The state borrowed money on Philadelphia's behalf because the state had a better bond rating, and said, well, if we're going to do this, we get to keep an eye on your books. And that's what the 5-year plan started out as. And the good thing is we're keeping the 5-year plan, even though PICA's bond debt has been satisfied. PICA still exists, and that's a good thing. So what do we got next? And so we're going to talk a little bit about some of the new investments. So in public safety in the 5-year plan, and just so everybody knows, the number up here, the number 6 right there, corresponds to the page where this information can be found in the 5-year plan document. Okay. Mm-hmm. So you go to City Council's website. They have what they call the Budget Center. You can click on the document. The document's almost 700 pages long. I have read the entire document because I'm one of the cool kids, and this is what I do. But I put the page numbers up there so people can see. If you want to go look at it and get some more detail, you can find that. So this upcoming budget year, the city will have $33.5 million in new investments for public safety. And that's $150 million over the life of the 5-year plan. They're looking for new police officers. The mayor wants to have about 400 new police officers per year. They want to expand community policing. This is all geared towards reducing violent crime. They want to look at the quality of life issues, specifically those ATVs when people are riding around in them, and then retail theft. And then they kind of also mix in long-term housing care treatment for the unhoused. Because they, if you're not housed, that's the first step, or a major step towards poverty, and then that could lead to crime. So that kind of gets factored into this too. Next slide, please. Clean and green. Denise's favorite phrase. I can't tell you how many times we heard this today.
I hear it in my sleep, Larry.
I know. $36 million for clean and green this year, and $246 million over the life of the 5-year plan. So just in a nutshell, it's cleaning residential communities and commercial areas, right? And what that means is really removing illegal trash dumps, abandoned cars, and graffiti. And what I'm going to tell you with this is I think there's a good portion of this that's really aimed at 2026, because that's going to be a major year here in Philadelphia. We got the World Cup coming. That's what is the term? Is it sesquicentennial? I don't know what it is, but it's an anniversary. You know what I mean? And
yes, sesquicentennial of the city of Philadelphia, and by extension, the United States.
That's right, because this is where it all started.
And also, for those of us who are baseball fans, we have the All-Star game.
Yeah,
coming to Citizens Bank Park.
It's going to be a big year in the city where the country began. I don't care what Boston says. It's Philadelphia. Next slide, please. Economic opportunity. And this is of particular interest to what we do, because we talk a lot about poverty. $20 million in this upcoming fiscal year and $130 million over the 5-year plan. So what this means, and what the mayor has said to us and in her public statements, the best poverty program, in her opinion, is a good job market. So they're investing in commercial corridors and workforce development, providing workforce development opportunities, reducing cost and complexity, which is like to start a business in the city of Philadelphia. There are multiple steps you have to go through. They want to sort of bring that down. And infrastructure for collaboration and investment. And I think that means when you start talking about larger companies being able to have the pipeline for different industries in the city, which is something I think is important. If the high schools can help educate people to go right into some of those jobs, well, that's a good thing. And I think that's one of the things you're going to see an emphasis on throughout the education plan. Now, I'd also like to see more anti-poverty programming. We haven't heard much about that. But that's another show topic for a little down the road. Next slide, please. Housing. Now, this is a big deal. And this, in fairness, this is, I think, anti-poverty programming right here. $16 million in this fiscal year and $60 million over the life of the 5-year plan for housing. The mayor wants to build 30,000 units of housing. It's also going to include emergency shelters, access to home ownership, housing preservation, and housing production. Philadelphia is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, housing stocks in the country. I think the average age of a home in Philadelphia is about 85 years old, something like that. And 85 years of wear and tear adds up. My house is 110 years old. And I think every day there's something else that I realize, that we should fix that. So being able to work with people for housing preservation, and a lot of what we talked about in budget today was, and I'm going to have a report on this for our newsletter on Friday, was about programs to help people stay in their homes and fix their homes. It's really expensive stuff. If you're a homeowner, and not everybody can afford that, but it's also not great to say to somebody, well, you can't afford it, you got to get out of your home. That's not a good thing either. So having some of these programs is really important. Next slide, please. Education. So this is going to be interesting. $24 million extra this year in the budget for education, $140 million over the 5-year plan, plus an additional $129 million because we're shifting the property tax millage rate. Okay? And what that means is, up till this year, 55% of the property tax revenue went to the school district and 45% went to the city. They're making a change in 1%, which I think is going to be $22 million this year. So now the school district gets 56% and the city gets 44%. One of the big things that the administration is talking about are these career pathways, educating somebody to go right into a job when they graduate, whether it be trades or something else. And I think as an investment, that makes sense to me. I think there's a lot there that can be done. But it needs to be concerted. Next slide, please. New investments overall. All right. Public safety. When we put the operating budget and the capital budget together, that's $600 million in public safety. $500 million in street paving, which we already talked about. That $500 million is going to go fast. $152 million in capital for the Parks and Rec department. Philadelphia taking care of business, the business corridors. $130 million in the operating budget. Schools, $129 million. SEPTA, $117 million extra, which will meet the 15% state match. Okay, that's really important. We're going to talk more about that on another show, because SEPTA, if you've been watching this, you know this bus revolution thing isn't going the way people want it to go. We haven't heard anything good about it. And then the triage and wellness facilities, $100 million in capital. You'll remember from previous shows that the administration couldn't really describe what a triage and wellness center was, but they're asking for $100 million for it in capital costs. That to me is a major sticking point. Hopefully we'll learn more about that very soon, because if they want it to be in this budget, people need to know what it really means. All right, next slide, please. So this is something that I think is really crucial, and we've discussed this a little bit in past shows. The fund balance, which is the amount of money the city has left after it takes care of all its obligations. In fiscal year 23, it was $981 million. That is the most it's ever been in city history, ever. It's almost $1 billion. By fiscal year 29, that dwindles to just over 14 million. Look at that. To me, that's shocking.
It is, because for you to go from close to $1 billion to the equivalent of what one department might get in the city budget, that's the kind of thing that would normally make an agency like PICA look at this and say, we need to talk about this.
Yeah.
Because what any municipal organization or school district or anybody that deals with taxpayer money will tell you, and they will like preach and preach and preach this to you, you have to have at least 5% of your budget in a fund balance off to the side whenever possible. And where cities and municipalities and school districts and various things get into trouble is when they don't have that money and an emergency comes up.
Right. Now, in fairness, the city does have a budget stabilization reserve and a rainy day fund. But again, those numbers are nowhere near what this fiscal year 2023 fund balance was. So I look at this and I'm concerned. And one of the things that I kind of think is the reason this balance goes lower, tax cuts. Last year, council reduced taxes by a minimal amount. But I think what you're seeing here is if you get to 29 and you don't cut those taxes, I think you have, maybe you have like 150 million left. And then that I didn't do any serious calculations on that. But it could be, right? $30 million a year over the course of 5 years. That could be where we end up with that. So that's something we need to keep an eye on. And again, these are estimates, so the numbers could change. But when I see that fiscal year 29 number, it's cause for concern, I think. Next slide, please. So we have been keeping an eye on a couple of these other numbers too. Real estate tax revenue. All right. So starting with fiscal year 23, that was $809 million. By fiscal year 29, it's estimated to be over $1 billion. For this fiscal year, it's $876 million. You see, it's a gradual increase every year. And one of our questions is, well, does that mean we're going to have reassessments like we did a couple of years ago that created all kinds of havoc across the city? Is that where we're headed with this? And this is an indication that, yeah, at some point that's probably going to happen, and probably sooner than we think. Because they're probably due for it. They technically should do it every year. They haven't done it in a couple of years. So this suggests to me that we will see some kind of property tax increase soon. That's how I read that. So that's real estate tax revenue. Next slide, please. Projected sinking fund obligations. So sinking fund obligations, what does that mean? The sinking fund is what the city owes in debt service, what it pays on its bonds that it takes out. All right. So when you go to the ballot, usually on one of the, sometime during the year, there'll be a question that says, should the city borrow X amount of money for sewage projects? Right. When they're borrowing money, they're usually taking out bonds. Okay. They're selling bonds and then they pay them back over time. And that's what this is. That's what the sinking fund is. It's the amount of money the city owes. Okay. And you see that goes up. In this budget year, it's $355 million. By the time you get to the end of the 5-year plan, it goes up by about $52 million. So the city intends on borrowing. And you're going to see them borrow some money. And I don't think that's always a bad thing. Because if you want to do a project and, you say, okay, we're doing this project now. The bond is a 30-year bond, let's say, right? Over the course of those 30 years, the usage you get out of whatever that thing is might be worth the amount you're going to pay back in the bond. It's reasonable. It's like using your credit card for something. It's kind of what this is. And the city also refinances the bonds at various points and saves money that way when the rates go down. Right now, the rates aren't so great. But maybe in 5 years, the rates will come down and the city can refinance some of that debt, just like you would your credit card or your mortgage or something like that. They do that sometimes, and they save money that way. But this suggests that we are going to see more debt. Next slide, please. And this is one of our favorite topics here, definitely one of Lance Haver's favorite topics, the Water Rate Stabilization Fund. We know that there's going to be a water rate increase this year. There has been for the last 4 years. This is the amount of money that the water department keeps in that fund, called the Water Rate Stabilization Fund, which they do not use to stabilize the water rates. Fiscal year 24 is $131 million. Fiscal year 25, it'll be $127 million, so it went down a little bit, but it goes back up. And by fiscal year 29, it's 146, almost $147 million. Just sitting there. They're not going to use that to stabilize the water rates. It's just going to sit there. And that is to appease the bond rating agencies. Because the more money you have in reserve, the more you can borrow. But that money does not go to stabilize the water rates. You can see that it grows fairly steadily over the next 5 years, and that's where we are with that. I don't think there are any more slides there, Allison. Are there? I don't think so. All right. So that's a snapshot of the 5-year plan. What some of the major components that the city is looking at, some of those key numbers we keep an eye on: fund balance, water stabilization reserve, things like that, sinking fund, so we know what kind of debt we're talking about here. Overall, I like some of the investments. I don't like the fact that as we get towards the end, there's not a lot of money left in the city's pocket. I think that's a bigger issue. But we're gonna learn more as these budget hearings go on. I've been to all the budget hearings so far. They start around 10 and go until late in the evening sometimes. So it's been interesting. But now, Denise, we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk more about finance and more about money with City Controller Christy Brady, whose office put out a very good report that people should take a look at about the community expansion grants. we had concerns about these grants when they first came out under the Kennedy administration, because we didn't know if there was going to be somebody who was going to keep an eye on all the details for some of these small organizations to help them out with it, right? Because if you're a small organization and you get this huge influx of money, it's not the easiest thing in the world to do to manage it yourself if you haven't done that before. We were told, no, it'll be fine. We're going to have people to do that. Well, guess what didn't happen? So that's why the city controller did this report. And here is our interview with City Controller Christy Brady. All right, City Controller Christy Brady, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So before we get into the report, I'd like to talk a little bit about what the City Controller's office does. Can you tell us a little bit about your responsibilities?
Absolutely. Well, the City Controller is an independently elected office. We audit the city and the school district's financial statements, all the grant money that comes into the city and the school district. It's called the single audit. We also review the city's 5-year plan, and we also audit all the city departments. So people really like us when we enter a room.
And one of the things that the City Controller's office has always done very well is put out these great reports on different aspects of government and finance. And you just put one out that I read it over the weekend. I think it's outstanding, and I think it sheds a light on something really important. Can you tell us a little bit about the review your office conducted regarding these anti-violence grants?
Absolutely. So back when I was appointed at acting city controller, when the former controller resigned to run for mayor, I was looking into what we can do as an office to combat gun violence. We're not policymakers, but we do look at expenditures and the money that leaves the city. So what I initially found out was that the money was budgeted in the managing director's office. So you would think that the contract would be also within that same department where the money's funded. That would be the normal process. However, we found that the contract with the oversight agency was in the health department. And right there, it just made me sort of scratch my head. Like, why did that happen? That's unusual. And then I had to resign to run for office. And during that period, I wanted to look into these programs. I had made that promise on the campaign trail that I would look at the Community Expansion Grant Program as part of looking at something that we can do to combat the gun violence in the city. And I made true on my promise.
And, when this program was first announced, I think a lot of people said, oh, this is great. Community groups are already doing some of this work. But there was also concern around, now we're giving groups that were operating on a shoestring budget a lot more money. Do they have the capacity to handle that? And is there somebody who's going to be with them to help them understand the limits and what they can do and what they can't do? And it seems like there was a gap there between maybe the intention and where it ended up. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about some of those issues, like a couple of things they talked about, contract confusion and lacking transparency? What were some of those things that you found?
Yes, well, having the money funded in one department and having that and having the contract with the oversight agency in another department, how is that money going to get quickly into the hands of these community groups that are doing the prevention work that they're doing? When we talk about the extraordinary work of groups like the 57 Block Coalition, Anti-Moors Group, Unity in the Community, or NOMO, these groups are doing amazing work in the community preventing gun violence. I spoke with them and other providers, and they are out there doing that great work. But having a contract for the oversight in another department when the funding is somewhere else, you're not getting that money into the right people's hands quickly. So, the report focused on the city's inability to roll out the program correctly, and that led to confusion. They went to the oversight agency and said, we need to get this money out. And in good faith, that provider started giving out the funds to these community-based organizations without getting any money from the city, just on good faith, while the contract was still being worked out. The scope of services should have been set. There's one thing to say that a contract is still being negotiated, and you're going into like the legalese of risk or other types of legal paperwork, but what you should do, the process, how you're supposed to reimburse the how you're supposed to get reimbursed for invoices, things like that, that wasn't set yet. And to start this process without having that in place led to confusion. A backdating contracts, it just wasn't very transparent, and wasn't well run in the beginning.
Yeah, and that just leads to more and more confusion, especially for the groups who haven't been through this before.
Yes.
So how do we start to fix this?
Well, the city has fixed it by the next round that they had. They made sure that the contract was in place. They went and requested bids. So they did do an RFP process. They kept it in the managing director's office this time. Requested bids, got a proposal. It was much more transparent, much more laid out. No money was given until the contract was in place, and it appears that it's on the right track.
Mm-hmm. And you had mentioned earlier that as city controller, you're looking for ways that the office can help tackle some of the bigger problems in the city, particularly gun violence and maybe poverty. Can you talk a little bit more about that? What is it that the controller's office can do to help sort of alleviate these situations?
Thank you for that question. One of the main things that we can do is work with the legislators, meaning city council. I don't legislate, city council does, and work with the administration. So if I can build that relationship with them, which, by the way, having run on in a special election alongside the mayor and city council, it allowed me to build those relationships. And so I am working with them. What do you need me to look into to offer you a report that gives you the recommendations that we need to get on the right track? I've also been going out to community groups and working with the Boys and Girls Clubs. We're going to be setting up a financial literacy program in some of those sites, which I'm thrilled to do. And that also is part of tackling poverty, that financial literacy and education in our youth, along with partnering with the people, the stakeholders that we need to partner with to get them, as I said, to implement our recommendations. That's what I want. That's my goal, is to issue a report and have someone implement my recommendations.
Well, you bring up the financial literacy, and that was something that former Councilmember Alan Dom would speak about all the time. And it's really important. So I'm glad to see that, there's something coming in that sounds great.
Yes. And another program that we have that we're starting is also financial literacy for returning citizens.
Mm-hmm.
It was during when I was going around to community groups, someone talking to people, someone said, don't forget them. And so we're starting a financial literacy program for returning citizens too.
So, we're in budget season right now in city government. What is your role in that budget process?
My role in the city budget process is just coming in and presenting as a department. Also, we review the city's 5-year plan. So we actually don't approve the budget. We look at what's spent. So that's city council's job to approve each of the individual departments' budgets. What we do is audit what is spent.
And is there maybe at the end of the process, do you make a recommendation, or do you file a report?
For the city, the budgeting process, there's a fine line because we are independent of the city. So I can't direct departments on how to spend their money. I can only, so what my job is if a department presents a budget and that budget gets approved, and then the administration is supposed to go, whether if it's community expansion grant programs for gun violence or whatever that initiative is in each of the departments, I go in and make sure that they are doing the functions that they're supposed to be doing within the budget that they have.
Okay.
Oh, now, and I'm also doing a monthly newsletter called Municipal Money Matters, and that's looking into certain areas. The first newsletter that went out had to do with the soda tax.
Well, and I recommend people look at this because there's so much important information, because when we talk about the tax dollars, that's what drives everything else. So it's really important to discuss that.
Yes.
Now, I wasn't sure this was going to happen. My colleague Denise Clay Murray joined us. She was going to be covering the vice president day, but she's here. Denise, do you have a couple questions for the city controller?
Yes, actually, I do. Thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it. I guess my first question for you is, what made you decide to run for controller in the first place? Because that's got to be a thankless job on some level, because you have all these reports and you make these suggestions and you can't really make anybody follow your suggestions, even though they're good suggestions.
Well, that's where I believe relationship building is. But I'll tell you, I've been working in the controller's office for almost 30 years, and I absolutely love what I do. I believe our reports help the citizens of, I've always believed, ever since I was an auditor trainee, that our work helps the citizens of Philadelphia, whether if it's our financial statement opinions, that affects the city's bond rating, which would affect the city's ability to borrow money, to a performance audit that could help possibly, if the administration takes our recommendations, fixes a policy or procedure. I was never political. When I was named acting city controller, I wasn't going to run for office. I never, I just thought, I'll just make a few changes in the office that I wanted to make. And when the next controller comes in, it'll be ready to go. And, but when I was in here, I liked it. I was approached by different council members asking me what my vision would be for the office. And I realized that I can do this. And then I ended up resigning to run, and I could not be happier. I love what I do. And when a report that we issue, when the recommendations are implemented, or while we're performing the audit and the department sees that, yeah, we can improve it and improves it even while the audit's going on, it just makes me happy, because I know that we did the right thing. And like I said before, running alongside the mayor and city council has helped me build relationships where we're working together to have me look into certain things for that, to give them the information to be able to legislate and make changes. I have an example. When I was an audit director, I was given the task of doing a performance audit on the fire department. And it was when the city was browning out the firehouses throughout the city and then transferring firefighters from that have been in a certain firehouse for long periods of time and then moving them to a completely different area of the city. And what our audit found was that, of course, the response times for the engines took longer because I don't know if I explained browning out firehouses when a firehouse was temporarily closed, and you wouldn't even, most of the residents didn't even know it. They see a firehouse and they think there's firemen in the firehouse, but the city was trying to save money, but it was jeopardizing public safety. And our audit proved that not only was it jeopardizing public safety, but it didn't save money. And when we also found out when the fire men were going from one firehouse, say in South Philly, moving them all into Center City or West Philly, Northeast Philly, there were there's different areas of the city. You know, you're not an expert in high rises if you're in South Philly. You're not an expert in row homes in say Alney, or you just know the different areas, you know where the fire hydrants are. Well, in the end, when we issued our report, the mayor and the controller stood together and they ended those policies the day the report was issued. And I want to do that.
Okay. Now, when people hear the word audit, there's a picture that comes to mind. It involves the IRS. It involves a whole lot of digging into your financial life. What
Now
is
you're
the
making me sweat.
But what is the difference between, first of all, what's the difference between an audit and a performance audit, like a regular audit and a performance audit? And what should citizens know about what it is you do in terms of audits, and how it might be different than what they think of when they hear the word audit?
Well, it's definitely not an IRS audit. The closest thing the city has to that would be in the revenue department. They do have people that go out and look for tax evaders. That would be the revenue department. What we do are financial statement audits. So that is us issuing an opinion on the fair presentation of the city's financial statements and the school district's financial statements. A performance audit would look at efficiency and effectiveness of processes. That's where that fire department audit came in at. That's where this review of the community expansion grant program came in at. That's where we would look to see how we can improve a system.
Okay. Now, you mentioned the financial literacy programs that the controller's office wants to do. When will those start, and how can people access them?
Well, they should be starting probably at the start of the school year is what our goal is. And it'll probably be on our social media for sure, from the Boys and Girls Club and on our website.
Okay. So
and Facebook and all.
Okay. So I guess my last question, during the time that the rollout of the community expansion grants came out, the Inquirer did a series of stories in which they detailed some of the misuse of that money, and how, you know, there were some things going on, like people starting boxing clubs that weren't necessarily authorized to start, this kind of thing and stuff. How do we get that money back? And does your report, I mean, can your report be used to kind of be something that helps the city get that money back?
Well, our report focused on the city's inability to roll out the program correctly. So whether or not there's any ability to get money back is something that I would have to look into. But our report focused on the city's inability to roll it out properly, transparently. it just, backdating contracts just led to confusion, which led to problems with oversight. I mean, it all contributes. So
now, during the time that they were setting that particular program up, the gun violence issue was like on the front pages every day. There were a whole lot of shootings and a whole lot of deaths. In fact, the
yes.
controller's office helped the thing that you all do in terms of gun violence really helped me with a book I just finished writing on gun violence. So I appreciate you all for that. But at that time, there was a sense of urgency on the part of residents for us to, for there to be something done. Do you think that sense of urgency kind of contributed to this? Because sometimes when you're trying to do things fast, you don't always get them right the first time.
And that's where problems can occur when you go and don't follow the right processes and get involved in rolling out a program if you wanted to get the money quickly, the contract was conformed in a department where the money wasn't funded. Shouldn't that contract be conformed in the department that had the funding that would be able to get that money out faster? You know, on page 2 of our report, we do show that gun violence dropped, and from the high of in 2021 to today, and we do highlight the good work that these organizations were doing as well. You know, the 57 Block Coalition. I mean, these organizations are out there doing the work and getting our youth together and doing these violence prevention efforts, and I applaud them for that.
Okay, well, thank you again for joining us. We really appreciate it, and I'm going to give you back to Larry McGlynn, my co-host.
Oh, it was nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. And you're still listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5.
All right, thank you, Denise. And Controller Brady, thank you so much for joining us. People can find your information and reports at controller.phila.gov. I recommend people take a look at that because there's a lot of great information there. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much, Larry. Talk to you soon. All right, we would like to thank Controller Christy Brady for joining us in the program tonight. I think, she's going to come back with us soon to talk more about city finance and government. And we're very grateful to have her expertise. And, it's interesting, because as we're in this budget season, it almost feels like there's too much information at times. As I was preparing the 5-year plan report, I kept cutting things. Originally, I think I had about 27 slides. I'm like, well, we can't do that. We just can't. So you have to pick and choose a little bit. One thing that I'm going to choose to talk about right now, just very briefly, and we're going to talk about this more, is trash disposal and what we do with it. And one of the things we do is we take some of our trash to Chester, Pennsylvania, and it's incinerated. And what happens there is 30% asthma rates around that plant are 30% higher than average in children. Oh, go ahead, Denise.
Well, no, it's just that I'm thinking about that moment in the mayoral campaign where what you're talking about was brought up to one of the candidates, and his response was less than charitable about the citizens of Chester, despite the fact that what you are describing is one of the ultimate forms of what is known as environmental racism.
Yes.
Where stuff like trash to steam plants and dump sites and things like that are put in neighborhoods that are predominantly Black and brown, and they attract such things as cancer clusters, asthma clusters, and the different things that you're talking about.
And the reason I bring it up now is because it came up during the budget hearing today. And Councilmember Nina Ahmad was very succinct about it and said we shouldn't be doing this. Now that contract with that company is up for renewal. I think in 2027 is what they said. And I think it would be a major mistake for the city to do this again.
It would, if for no other reason, but it's already kind of been put out there. There's a lack of concern on the part of Philadelphians about this trash going to Chester. It's one thing to suspect it. It's another thing to have it confirmed for you. But on the other hand, you're going to have people who are going to say, well, Chester's broke and needs the money. But as my mom used to always say, not all money is good money. And it's not good money when you're basically, creating these clusters of chronic illness that your residents have to deal with.
And I don't think it's a surprise to say if this were happening on, say, the main line.
Which it would not.
But if it did, we'd be having a different conversation right now.
Oh, it'd be a much different conversation because there's no way that you're going to put a trash to steam plant or you're definitely not going to send Philadelphia's trash to a dump site next to a $500,000 home.
No,
that's not going to happen. And, it goes back to something we talk about a lot here on Hall Monitor, the subject of poverty. And when you look at where poverty is, what's surrounding poverty, and who was affected by poverty, stuff like where the city puts its trash is one of those subjects that we have to talk about, because if we decide not to renew this contract in Chester, then the question becomes, where does our trash go? And let's be honest here, despite the fact that, Mayor Parker wants to turn the city into the cleanest, greenest city in America with economic opportunity for all, the bottom line is Philly has not gotten recycling right yet. It has not. And I know this because when I lived in the city, I'm from New Jersey. We did recycling right. We had a separate bin for paper. We had a separate bin for plastic. And you had to have your recycling out on a certain day in order for folks to pick it up. But recycling is so catch can sometimes here in the city. Sometimes you can get a container, sometimes you can't. Sometimes your recycling gets picked up, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you have an idea of what you're supposed to put in a recycling bin. Sometimes you don't. I feel like if the new commissioner of Clean and Green, Carlton Williams, doesn't do anything else, what he needs to do is to get Philadelphians to understand that A, recycling is important. B, recycling does not mean throw it on the ground in front of a trash can. And C, that, when you know what to recycle and have the recycling picked up on a consistent basis every week, every 2 weeks, whenever you're going to do it. And maybe have some bigger recycling bins, because in Wilmington, where I live now, we don't have little bitty recycling bins. We have recycling bins that are the size of trash cans. Because if you're like me and my husband, Chris, we drink a lot of bottled water. Most of our recycling is bottled water and stuff I used to cook.
So we do have to wrap it up. So we will be back next week on Hall Monitor, and we hope you join us.
Have a good night.